It was early morning at a small private airfield, shrouded in an eerie silence. A dense mist blanketed the ground, wrapping around the squat buildings and the few planes parked nearby. The usual bustle of the airfield was absent, and only a handful of workers could be seen moving through the gray fog. Among them was a young man in a worn-out jacket and scuffed sneakers. His name was Tyler, a 16-year-old who worked as a cleaner at the airfield. Normally, Tyler's face radiated friendliness, but today it was tense, his eyes locked onto a sleek black limousine pulling up to the runway. He wasn't there by chance. Tyler had overheard something he wasn't meant to hear. The night before, while cleaning one of the hangars, he had accidentally eavesdropped on a conversation between two men. They were speaking quickly, their voices low, but the words were clear enough. They were planning to kidnap billionaire John Winchester. "The plane will be redirected. Everything is arranged. We've got a pilot," one man had said. "We'll intercept it over the Atlantic. No trace left behind." "Are you sure he'll be on board?" asked the second, his voice rough and assertive. "Of course. It's Winchester. He sticks to his schedule. Tomorrow he's flying to London for a board meeting. Everything will go smoothly." Tyler froze as he listened, his heart pounding. The words played over and over in his head. Asterisk, this is wrong. This is dangerous. He wanted to run, but his feet felt rooted to the floor. The men left without noticing him, but Tyler couldn't stop thinking about what he had heard. He knew he had to do something. And now, here he was, standing near the runway, watching as the black limousine glided smoothly to a stop beside a gleaming white jet. The car door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a sharp, tailored suit. John Winchester himself. The billionaire's presence radiated confidence and authority, a man clearly accustomed to having the world at his feet. Tyler's palms grew damp. He knew he had only seconds to act. If he hesitated, Winchester would board the plane, and it would be too late. "Mr. Winchester!" Tyler yelled, breaking into a sprint toward the limousine. Two bodyguards in matching black suits instantly stepped in front of him. One, a stocky man with a square jaw, raised his hand to block Tyler. "Step back, kid. You're not supposed to be here," he said firmly. "Please, I need to talk to him. It's urgent," Tyler shouted, trying to maneuver around the guards. "It's a matter of life and death." Winchester, who was halfway up the plane's steps, stopped in his tracks and turned, curious about the commotion. He saw the boy struggling against his guards and furrowed his brow. Normally, he would ignore such incidents, but something about this seemed different. "What's going on here?" he asked, descending the stairs. His voice was cold but commanding. "This kid says he needs to talk to you," one of the guards replied. "Probably some lunatic." "No, you don't understand," Tyler interrupted, still being held back. "They're planning to kidnap you. Your plane, it's already set up for the hijacking." The boy's words landed like a thunderclap. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, and Winchester's expression hardened. He gestured for the guards to let Tyler go. "That's a serious accusation," Winchester said, folding his arms. "Do you even realize what you're saying?" "Yes! I heard them talking!" Tyler blurted out, his voice trembling but his eyes unwavering. "They said the pilot has been bribed and they're going to redirect your flight. There's no time to waste." Winchester raised an eyebrow, his face unreadable. After a moment of silence, he turned to his guards. "Check the plane," he ordered curtly, "and everyone working on it today." The guards obeyed without question. Tyler stood there, a breeze brushing his face. He had done everything he could. Now all he could do was wait. Tyler watched nervously as the security team began a meticulous inspection of the plane. The tension in the air was palpable. Every sound, footsteps, murmured commands, seemed amplified in the quiet stillness of the airfield. His heart raced. He had done what he could, but now the question loomed. Would they believe him? John Winchester had stepped aside, holding his phone and speaking in short, clipped sentences. Tyler couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see the billionaire's face growing more serious with each passing moment. Time seemed to stretch unbearably as everyone waited for the results of the inspection. Finally, one of the security guards approached Winchester, leaning in to speak quietly. Whatever he said made John's face darken, his jaw tightening in a way that suggested something serious had been uncovered. Without a word, Winchester turned sharply and headed toward the plane. Tyler hesitated, then called out, "What did they find?" His voice was shaky, but his determination outweighed his nerves. Winchester stopped and looked at him, his sharp gaze assessing. For a moment, it seemed like he wouldn't answer, but then he gestured for Tyler to follow him. "Come with me. You need to see this," he said curtly. As they reached the base of the stairs, Tyler noticed a pilot standing nearby, flanked by 2 security guards. The man's face was pale, beads of sweat visible on his forehead despite the cool morning air. He shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny of those around him. Tyler recognized the man from the airfield. He'd seen him before, but never in such a state. The pilot avoided eye contact, his hands trembling slightly. "This man," Winchester began, his voice cold and deliberate, "doesn't belong here. His credentials are fake. He's not one of my employees." Tyler's stomach churned. So it was true. Someone had infiltrated Winchester's crew. But the surprises didn't end there. One of the guards led them to an open cargo compartment where a nondescript suitcase had been discovered. It was carefully set down and opened. Inside, nestled among other items, was a strange-looking device that immediately caught everyone's attention. "What is that?" Tyler asked, unable to keep the nervous edge out of his voice. "It's a transmitter and a signal jammer," one of the guards explained. "With this, they could have cut off all communication and hidden the plane's location. It's professional-grade equipment." Winchester stared at the contents of the suitcase, his face unreadable. But the tight set of his jaw and the way his hands clenched at his sides spoke volumes. "They would have succeeded," he said, almost to himself. "They knew everything about my schedule. Someone on the inside must have helped them." Tyler remembered the conversation he had overheard, replaying every word in his mind. "One of them mentioned someone named Mark or Martin," he said. "They said he was the one who gave them your itinerary." Winchester turned to him sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Mark Longstreet," he muttered. "My senior assistant. He knows my schedule better than I do." For a moment, disbelief flickered in his expression. "No, that's impossible. He's been with me for over 10 years. It has to be someone else." Just then, one of the security guards approached with a serious expression and spoke quietly to Winchester. The billionaire's face hardened even further, his eyes darkening. "Tyler," he said, turning back to the boy. "You're sure you heard the name Mark?" Tyler nodded firmly, his voice steady. "Yes, they said he passed along the information." Winchester pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. He dialed a number and waited, his expression a mask of tension. "Mark," he said when the call connected, his voice unnervingly calm. "Where are you?" "I see. Be here in 20 minutes." He hung up and looked at his security team. "Find him, immediately." The guards dispersed, and Winchester exhaled deeply, the weight of the situation clearly pressing on him. He turned back to Tyler. "You were right," he said, his voice carrying a grudging respect. "If you hadn't spoken up, I would have boarded that plane and I might not be standing here right now." Tyler shifted uncomfortably under Winchester's gaze but held his ground. I knew it was wrong. I couldn't just stay quiet." For the first time, a faint, approving smile touched Winchester's lips. But the moment was brief. He straightened, his focus now on the unfolding investigation. Somewhere, a trusted ally had betrayed him, and soon he would have to face that bitter truth. The airfield buzzed with activity as security teams intensified their investigation. Every member of Winchester's staff was being questioned, and every inch of the plane and its surroundings was scoured for further evidence. John Winchester paced back and forth, his usual air of composure replaced by a simmering tension. He was a man who prided himself on control, yet now, that control felt precariously out of reach. Tyler stood to the side, observing the scene. Despite the sense of relief that came from being believed, unease gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was far from resolved. Then he remembered something, a fragment of the conversation he'd overheard the night before. "One of them mentioned a name," he said aloud, stepping toward Winchester. "They said someone named Mark or Martin was helping them." Winchester stopped pacing and turned to look at him, his expression sharp and assessing. "Mark Longstreet," he said, almost under his breath. "My senior assistant. He's been with me for over a decade. He knows my schedule better than anyone." He paused, as if the very idea was unthinkable. "No, it can't be him. He's loyal." But even as he said it, doubt flickered across his face. Before Tyler could respond, a guard approached with a grave expression and leaned in to whisper something to Winchester. The billionaire's jaw tightened, and his knuckles whitened as he gripped his phone. "Tyler," he said, his voice calm but cold. "Are you absolutely sure you heard the name Mark?" Tyler nodded firmly. "Yes. They said he gave them your itinerary." Winchester exhaled sharply, pulling out his phone. His movements were quick and deliberate as he dialed a number. "Mark," he said when the call connected. "Where are you?" "I see. Be here in 20 minutes." He hung up and turned to his security team. "Find him, now!" The guards moved with purpose, their radios crackling with activity. Tyler could see the storm brewing in Winchester's eyes. The betrayal, if true, was personal. It wasn't just a matter of security. It was a wound to his pride and trust. Minutes later, Mark Longstreet arrived, escorted by 2 guards. He was dressed impeccably as always, but there was a nervous energy about him that hadn't been there before. His confident stride faltered slightly as he approached Winchester. "John, what's going on?" Mark asked, his voice steady but edged with tension. "Why are your men treating me like a suspect?" Winchester's eyes bored into him. "Because there's evidence that someone close to me provided details of my itinerary to the people who planned to hijack my plane, and your name has come up." Mark's expression froze, his mouth opening slightly as if to protest, but no words came out. Tyler watched as the man's face drained of color. "That's ridiculous," Mark finally managed. "You know I'd never—" "Don't lie to me," Winchester interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "We've already traced messages sent from your phone to a number linked to the conspirators. Do you want to explain that?" Mark staggered, visibly shaken. "John, listen to me. I can explain." "Explain what?" Winchester's voice rose, his composure slipping. "That you sold me out? That you put my life at risk for money?" Mark's shoulders sagged, and he cast his eyes downward. His silence spoke louder than any denial. The guard stepped forward to take him away, and Winchester turned his back, his face a mask of cold fury. Tyler could see the pain behind his stoic demeanor. This wasn't just about business. This was a personal betrayal of the worst kind. As the car carrying Mark disappeared down the airfield, Winchester stood silently for a moment, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the day's revelations. Finally, he turned to Tyler. "You saved my life," he said quietly, his voice devoid of its usual commanding tone. "And you exposed the person I trusted most. Without you, I'd have walked straight into their trap." Tyler shifted uncomfortably under the praise, but he met Winchester's gaze. "I just did what I thought was right," he said. "I couldn't stay quiet." Winchester nodded slowly, his eyes filled with something Tyler couldn't quite place. Respect, perhaps, or gratitude. But the storm was far from over. The conspiracy had been stopped, but the scars it left behind were only beginning to show. As the car carrying Mark disappeared down the airstrip, silence returned to the airfield, heavy and somber. John Winchester stood motionless for a moment, staring into the distance. The betrayal had cut deeper than he cared to admit. He prided himself on control, on surrounding himself with people he trusted implicitly. Yet, one of those closest to him had nearly cost him everything. Tyler watched the billionaire, unsure if he should say something. Part of him wanted to slip away quietly, to let the events of the day resolve themselves. But before he could decide, Winchester turned to him, his face a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. "You've done something today that most people wouldn't have dared," Winchester said, his voice low but steady. "You stood up when it mattered, and because of that, I'm standing here now." Tyler shifted on his feet, uncomfortable under the weight of Winchester's gaze. I knew it was wrong. I couldn't just ignore it," he said simply. Winchester stepped closer, placing a hand on Tyler's shoulder. The gesture was unexpected, almost fatherly, and it surprised Tyler as much as it reassured him. "Let me ask you something," Winchester said. "Why were you even here? Why would a kid like you care what happens to someone like me?" Tyler hesitated, then shrugged. "I work here, cleaning the hangars. I overheard them talking last night while I was working late. I didn't know what to do, but I figured if I didn't say something, no one else would." Winchester studied him for a long moment. For a man accustomed to seeing the world through a lens of transactions and self-interest, Tyler's honesty was a rare and humbling revelation. "You said something," Winchester said finally, his tone softening. "And it made all the difference." The tension in the air eased slightly as the remaining security team began wrapping up their work. Winchester motioned for one of his guards to approach, giving quiet instructions before turning back to Tyler. "Tell me," Winchester said, his tone now more curious than commanding. "What do you want to do with your life? What's your dream?" Tyler blinked, taken aback by the question. I don't know," he admitted. "I've thought about going to school, maybe studying engineering, but college is expensive and my mom already works hard enough." Winchester nodded thoughtfully. "You work here to help your family?" "Yeah," Tyler said. "My mom's a nurse. She's raising me and my little brother on her own. I just want to help out." Winchester's face softened, and for the first time that day, a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Listen to me, Tyler," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You've proven today that you have something money can't buy: integrity. That's rare, and it deserves to be rewarded." He gestured for one of his assistants, who approached with a folder. Winchester took it and handed it to Tyler. "In here," Winchester said, "is a full scholarship to any university of your choice. You want to study engineering? Medicine? Law? It's up to you. I'll cover everything: tuition, books, living expenses. You don't have to worry about a thing." Tyler stared at the folder, his hands trembling slightly as he took it. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Say you'll make the most of it," Winchester said with a rare smile. "That's all I need to hear." Tyler looked up at the billionaire, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Winchester nodded, but there was a seriousness in his expression as he continued. "You've taught me something today, Tyler. You reminded me that true strength doesn't come from power or money. It comes from doing what's right, even when it's hard." The sound of approaching sirens signaled the arrival of the authorities, ready to take over the investigation. As the police began their work, Winchester gave Tyler a final nod before walking toward his car. News of the event quickly spread, and Tyler's story became a symbol of bravery and integrity. But for Tyler, it was more than that. It was proof that doing the right thing could change not just a single life, but many. And for John Winchester, it was a humbling reminder that sometimes the people who seem the smallest make the biggest impact.